Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at an in-depth guide for Lux, and as you know in my last top 5 video for mid laners I stuck her at number 1, so I thought I'd do a proper guide for her. So Lux has a decent-ish lane phase, like it's not amazing, but she does have good poke and she gets much stronger with items. Mid and late game is where she shines properly. This is where she can one burst someone and that's probably her biggest strength. She has a really good poke and it's very long range poke and hard to dodge as well. She's hard to push against because she's just going to poke you over and over again, and you have to always be careful that you don't get snared because it will stop you right in your tracks. But she's also very hard to defend against too because you're just going to poke you away from towers and take them for free. So whether she's behind or ahead, she's always going to be very difficult to deal with. Now the bad stuff, she has no mobility. If you position badly, you are going to get punished, and that's just one of the things you have to kind of accept with Lux. But thankfully, it's one of the only things you have to think about properly. She does need a few items before she really starts to hurt, so she can't necessarily do as much early as other champions, and she's very skill shot based. If you miss them, you're going to do no damage. Now there are really two builds, I guess, and it's more kind of order than anything else. The standard is Morello, Ludens, Salt Boots, Deathcap, Void Staff, and Zhonya's. That is the standard stuff on Lux really. We want some cooldown reduction to poke more, some mana regen for the same reason, but a lot of raw damage to burst once we catch someone in our combo. The Glass Cannon build will be something more like one of these variations. This build is all about making the spells at the start of the fight count, and it's a lot more punishing if you miss, but if you hit them you'll do more damage. You won't have as much mana regen if you skip the Morello entirely, so it's kind of less about poke and spamming spells and more about fewer spells dealing more damage. In theory, this starts to carry a little bit earlier in the game, but it is a bit more risky in my opinion. Now there are a few things I want to say about other items. So Morello or Athene's. Morello is more damage and that's why I recommend it, but if you're new to Lux or you just want to use your abilities more, then Athene's would actually be really good. I'd also get this in hard matchups like LeBlanc where the magic resist will come in handy and where I'm likely going to have to farm with my spells from range. So if you're ever against an AD laner, the one big choice you have to make is, do I get a Zhonya's early or not? And there are kind of two options against people like Zed, Talon, or Yasuo. Now you can either just get the arm guard part of it and then sit on that while going back to your usual kind of build, or you can rush a complete Zhonya. Now unless you're really struggling or they can actually kill you, I would just get the arm guard part. It will help in lane, it also gives you some AP, but you won't really be using the Zhonya in team fights much, so it's better to go back into other items first. Now some people get Lichbane on Lux, and in my opinion it's a luxury item. Like, it does help you in team fights against tanky frontline targets and it does do a lot of damage, but it doesn't add much to your combo. Finally, just a quick note about Frost Queen's claim. It's really good on Lux with the Ghost and the Gold generation both helping her, but honestly it's likely to get nerfed. If you're watching this video and it hasn't been nerfed and it still works, then you can just replace the Morello in these builds with a Frost Queen's claim, but if it has been nerfed then just get the Morello instead. I don't want to spend too much time on her skills, so we're going to TLDR the important stuff. Her passive, Illumination. Your abilities will mark enemies, your basic attacks will consume that mark and deal bonus damage. Your Q, your Light Binding, fires in a straight line that binds the first 2 targets it hits and it roots them for 2 seconds. Your W, Prismatic Barrier, throws a shield out in a line that shields herself and allies hit by it. It grants 1 shield on the way out and another on the way back, but they don't stack. Your E, your Lucent Singularity. This is your biggest spell and it's an AoE damage spell that lasts up to 5 seconds or until you press your E again to pop it. Your R, your Final Spark, fires a long range laser that deals damage and also procs your passive marks that are on the target. So ideally you want to hit them with your Q or your E first and then hit them with the ultimate. There aren't actually too many tips and tricks for Lux. She isn't that overly complicated, but there are a few that I try to use in my games. The first is for lane phase, when you're using your E on an enemy and they're already close to you. Even if your auto attack is already mid-air, as long as you pop your E and apply the passive before it lands, then it will still do the bonus damage. It's a nice little way of making sure they don't run away, or it's just harder to dodge your passive damage basically. So as your auto is flying through the air, activate your E. Next trick is for an easy binding. Your Q will go through the first target it hits and hit the second target too, and a lot of people forget about that. To land an easy binding in lane, you want to position yourself on the other side of a minion, normally a caster minion, and then you Q through that one and hit the enemy behind. Doesn't that just sound so simple? And yes, it is simple, but it's a very effective way of landing a binding. The final one is more of a tip for the mid game. Buy wards. Ward where you think people are likely to run around the map and then just sit over a wall and wait for them. They won't see it coming, but it's such an easy way to net a kill and you'll start to get yourself ahead pretty quickly. This is the main thing that I use mid game to snowball a game into my favor. There are only two parts to the lane phase with Lux, pre-6 and post-6. Pre-6 Lux isn't the best, she's still pretty decent, but most of your damage revolves around your passive, and unfortunately that means you have to be close to attack them. A good thing to remember as well, that proccing your passive with an auto will get minion aggro, so always make sure you walk back afterwards. The main thing you want to focus on at this stage of the game is poking and farming at the same time. So you wait for an enemy to stand near minions and then you hit both, that way you're going to be pushing and you get pressure at the same time. You only want to use your Q and your W if you need to, it's just kind of a waste of mana early, like your Q doesn't do much damage and your W doesn't shield much either. So post 6, this is where you can really start to bully your opponent, especially by using that binding trick I said earlier. Now you have some items you can poke with your E and it's actually gonna hurt. Don't worry too much about proccing your passive anymore either. Chances are the enemy has some damage, and if you get close enough to auto, they'll be close enough to unload their damage on your face. Once you have them low with some poke, you can really start to be more aggressive and punish them. Your aim really is to poke from range, bind, and then full combo to either kill or force them out of a lane to get an advantage. You aren't the best at roaming just because of your lack of mobility, so if you're going to do it, make sure you don't get caught along the way. So team fights. Actually, we're going to go into team fights, but the first thing to point out is that Lux is good at preventing team fights. It kind of sounds odd, right? But team fights are 5v5 fights that could go either way, and we don't want that. Ideally, we want to make them at least 5v4 to give us a head start. You need to poke before fight starts, be proactive and lower the health totals. That should be your first goal. Don't just sit back and wait for it to happen. Even better than that, you try to get a catch. You look for someone warding or just walking to another lane and grab them in your combo. Once you have that man advantage, you group and push, and even if your team don't group and push, at least you're going to get an extra kill and some more gold. Okay, in team fights, well, let's just get this out of the way at the very start, okay? We're not building defense, and you have one of the lowest base healths in the game, so you're going to be standing at the back of the fight most of the time. Use your W across as many people in your team as often as possible, but try to hit those at the front, taking most of the damage. It really does make a difference. Your E is very long range, and is capable of hitting their backline even while you're quite far back. Always try to aim for them, unless you want to burst down a tank at the front. Your Q is a bit of a different story. It hits up to 2 targets, remember, and it's great for getting tanks away from you or your AD carry, but it's also really punishing if an enemy carry gets too aggressive, as you can see in kind of a few of these clips. Ideally, you want to aim it through one person and onto a carry behind them if you can, because they're just not going to expect it. Your ultimate again is kind of like your E. In a perfect team fight, you'll catch 2 squishy targets with your Q, immediately E and ult, and you'll kill both with your burst. In most or harder team fights where you can't catch the carries, you want to try and put your passive on them first with your E, and then fire your ultimate at them in the back line. It'll almost kill them if it actually doesn't kill them, and that'll be pretty useless for the rest of the fight. Now anyway, that wraps up my in-depth guide to Lux. If you want to see more of these, make sure you hit that like button. It really gives me a good idea of how much you love them. Subscribe and comment on who you want to see next, but I'll catch you in my next video.